Ashley Cooks is the CEO and owner of Empower Her Strategies, LLC, a training consulting firm dedicated to designing impactful and inclusive learning experiences. As an instructional designer and training strategy consultant, she specializes in corporate training, curriculum development, and learner centered design. With a background in organizational communication, Ashley is passionate about fostering equity in workplace learning and helping organizations create effective, engaging training programs that drive meaningful outcomes. Today, Ashley's going to be talking about bridging the gap, designing inclusive learning experiences for a diverse workforce, which is definitely TLDC's jam. So thank you so much, Ashley, for being
Thank
here.
you for having
And
me.
yeah, and everybody, I hope that you enjoy the event. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and let you take over, Ashley.
Okay. Thank you so much. So excited to be here. I dropped a question in the chat because I like to have interactive trainings. I'm used to doing it in person, but I want to keep this interaction going. So think about a time, the last training you attended, did you feel like it was designed with you in mind? Why or why not? So just drop some answers in the chat. We'll talk about it more towards the end to see kind of like, what you think and how you design it, and how you can make those changes so that someone else can feel included in training that you create. So I'll get started. A little bit about myself before I jump into the slide is I've been doing this for some time now, and I have a very diverse background. So throughout this presentation, I'll kind of bring in some of those real life scenarios to kind of drive home um, points that I have on what to do for inclusion, and how it's all encompassed. I don't like to say that inclusion and diversity only is with race. I like to really think outside the box, to make sure that we reach everyone. So I'll get started with why it matters. Why inclusion matters when creating and learning design. Most of the time, when we create content, most people are engaged when they see maybe themselves, or, oh, this actually could relate to me or someone that I know. So when you create it in mind, inclusion and diversity in mind, it bumps up your engagement. People have more buy-in, and we know in the L&D world, buy-in is how we are able to move and see changes through the organization. Right now, currently in the workforce, at least for the US, and I know for different parts of Europe, we're seeing at least 5 generations actively working in the workforce. And so that's something that's also different than that's done before. I kind of talked a little bit before this presentation with someone, just telling them that in this time we have Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, boomers, all still working in the workforce together. And so right now we're seeing that, and that also should be taken into effect with inclusion, right? How we deliver messages, lingo we use, just formats we use, all that should be taken into consideration, because those are the people, our learners, that we're making content for. And inclusive design boosts knowledge. If you like it, you'll absorb it and you'll learn it and you'll change your behavior. Especially what I've seen is, like, okay, I understand what's happening, so now I know what I can do and how I can change. So that's kind of like the little facts portion about how I got here, and kind of what I've seen in my career of trends and how people adapt to different things. And so I'll go into the different factors of diversity. We have generational. I explained how we have a very, very big, open, wide now group of people that are in the workforce. We also have cultural. And cultural not only means cultures, it also can be different communication styles, different values. I've worked for a company where a large population was Vietnamese and Spanish. And I had to, in order to create content, I had to get to know not only their cultural background and understand the different cultures, but I also had to learn, like, okay, what is the main communication style for this population of people that I'm working with and making content for. Physical abilities. Some people might have hearing, maybe hearing impaired, or we might have visual impairment. And so those are the things in mobility. Um, Not everyone knows how to use a mouse and click through e-learning content. So I'll talk a little bit about how I discovered that, how no one was failing my tests because they didn't know the content. They just didn't know how to click through e-learning modules. So that's something that I am very, very passionate also about, just making sure physical accessibility is locked down. And then you have neurodiversity. I fall into that category as someone with dyslexia. I have a hard time reading long paragraphs, and I'm like, okay, what is the point? And I zone out throughout it too. And so making those micro learnings, creating those smaller modules are really, really important. But you have to know your population and kind of who you're working for. The neurodiversity is something that is more hidden, but if we just kind of make content with that in mind for everyone, it makes it a little bit easier when you're making that content. So just thinking about it, like, just assume everyone needs shorter content, because really at this time and age, small bits of information like TikTok, that's winning people over versus long drawn out trainings, from especially from what I've seen. And so I'll kind of dive into storytelling. I'm a firm believer of making sure the content for our story, we have storytelling involved in content. It's important because it kind of puts that real world scenario. It creates that connection for people. They understand human experiences. You're able to be taught easier if someone connects it to a story and you're able to recall and remember. And so when you're creating stories and storytelling, that's something that it's really beneficial, even if you're doing it in a case study, or if you're doing it in a way of just explaining things out of how to do a process. That helps with the flow, and develop characters that reflect your actual audience, right? So when I was working for my previous company, a manufacturing company, I mentioned previously that it was a large Hispanic and Vietnamese population, and that reflected based on which department. So if I was making content for, let's say, the conversion department, I understood that that department had a lot more Vietnamese population. So if I was making characters for my storytelling, I'd make sure to include typical names, right, of people, not specific people that were out on the floor, but common names, so they can say, "Oh, this person," without thinking and realizing they'll probably be more susceptible to understanding and reading because this is a name that I'm familiar with. Um, and create authentic scenarios. For instance, we had a lot of safety people. I created a lot of safety trainings at that previous company, and I would use real life scenarios that happened. You know, if we want to see a change and we want you to stop injuring yourself, let's use some scenarios of cases that they may have seen on the production floor, but let's highlight them in the light of where this is why we want you to do this. Because of this incident that actually people can remember, change the names, change, maybe the location of where you're describing it in the story for HIPAA, but like just making sure that this is something that can happen in a real life scenario. A roll the can fly off the machine and injure people. So let's talk about the time that Lynn forgot to secure this bolt and the roll flew off the machine. So it's real life scenarios. It's something that's worth them thinking more about, right? It's something that they're more susceptible to remember because it can actually happen. It's happened on the floor. Let me probably tune in to why, so that I don't get written up, I don't lose my life or injure someone else's life on the production floor. And then avoid stereotypes. That can be something that's hard, and so I use a lot of feedback from other people just to make sure, because if you're using diverse people that are more close to that population, if you're not a member of that population, it can be easy to include stereotypes in that narrative. So it's really good to just kind of check for the instructional designer checking themselves, saying, hey, let me take a moment, let me proofread this, have someone else proofread this, and make sure I'm not creating stereotypes, creating narratives that are common for that population and that's deemed in a negative light. Or even if it's in a positive light, you just want to make sure it's inclusive and it's not stepping on anyone's toes. So I do a lot of, hey, can someone check this out? I want to make sure that I'm not being biased or I'm not adding anything that's rude or false narrative. That's usually my kind of within that first review round that I have with my colleagues. um, just to kind of help avoid that matter. And then kind of bridging the gap for technology. I talked about working with a broad group of people. In that time of working and bridging those gaps and with technology, adaptive learning is something that's common. Right now, we're seeing AI. AI is everywhere. Also, self-paced is something that I've seen that's more highlighted, especially in manufacturing and in certain retail, because time, we need you to sell, we need you to be out on the floor, we need you to focus. So self-pacing is a trend that is very, very common. It's coming up a lot. I see it a lot more in the workforce. When I'm building out modules, I always think about, okay, what if this person only has 10 minutes to take this? What can I give them? A bits of chunks of information that will help them from start to complete within 10 minutes. Give them information on whatever equipment or whatever they're working on. And so by doing that, it makes it a little bit of a it makes it better for the supervisor and the manager out there, because they're able to say, I gave this person the opportunity to train and they're getting educated, but then also for me, because I'm able to see how that content is going and how it's working with it, because I do follow a lot of the analytics behind the content. um, and then mobile accessibility, that's a big deal. Maybe not necessarily mobile, but iPads I know are common right now in the workforce. A lot of techs, a lot of maintenance people have tablets, and that's how they do their content. That's what they do pretty much everything on. And so when I'm creating content, because we're a lot of it is like iPad and tablet based, it's important for us to just make sure that first of all, that we're building it with that in mind. We're building it with the mind of that someone's not sitting on a computer and they're going through these modules. They're going to be on their iPad, which means maybe not so much animation and things like that, to kind of have it just kind of make it more click based, but also where they can still you can still see that they're able to engage into the material, but then also make sure that it's offline. Because what happens if you're in a warehouse? My previous company, it was a warehouse, and so sometimes when you're far out away from the main building, Wi-Fi is spotty. But if they can download it and be able to still go through their modules, still go through the education, then that is beneficial for the learners. Um, and then I love feedback. When I'm making training, I want to make sure that it's made the best it can be made for the people that I'm making it for. So I need lots of feedback. So that's kind of where responsive design comes in. I want to make sure that you're able to click through it. It's very, very simple for you. You like it. It's comfortable for you. And then also immersive technology. I love VR when it comes to um, getting the learners acclimated, especially to where they're at and what they're doing. I do a lot of that in training, but making sure that it's mobile friendly. But I do a lot of that because it's the closest we can get them to touching the machine, right? Before you can physically put your hands on this machine, let's build out. I try to build out materials to where they can feel comfortable. When they're seeing the machine, the only thing they're noticing is, oh, this is what it actually looks like all together in front of me. I always make sure to put real pictures, whether that's going out there and getting really acclimated to the machine, myself with getting photos and videos so that they feel that they're actually able to move parts, right? And I'll talk a little bit about, if someone's interested in it, towards the end, what design programs I use to kind of make this content, how to use technology when I'm making this content. So, in the mind of accessibility, it's making sure that everything is so simple, keeping the design very, very simple and keeping it uniform across all platforms. For the company I currently work with now, my manager and I, we talk about, let's make this one template and we all have it going across, right? Same thing for my previous company. I set a standard of what e-learning material looks like, what documents look like. As someone that writes SOPs, those are always uniformed. I wanted the same kind of format for material when it came to e-learning or job aids, making sure everything looks good. So the first thing I did was build out a simple, basic template and design, something that's not too busy, something that is just easy for someone to see in their eyes to just go to their steps they need to go to, or information that they need to read. And then for visual, making sure the colors are not so overpowering. A lot of people love to go into Canva and jump in and do crazy, crazy designs. And I'm like, you don't need that much content. Let's take it back, because let's just keep it as simple as possible. Even if you look at this slide, it's very, very simple. I keep the text towards the center, space on the outer side, right? So just keeping it very, very simple, very easy to read. And then screen reader capability. I enjoy using one specific software to build out content called Storyline. And I love to, they have a screen reader capability. I discovered this when making content for my previous company, for people that were having issues visually. There's a specific population there that needed that visual aid and that visual help. And so that helped. Also for audio accessibility, captions on videos, right? I love to put captions. I've used it in Storyline. I've also used it in Premiere Pro. So just adding those captions in there so people are able to read, and transcriptions, and making sure that it's clear and crisp. I don't no longer do, thanks to AI. I no longer have to do those painful voiceovers. I use text to speech, and I find the most realistic sounding voice that sounds more human, capability, or like a human said it, and I use that to write all my scripts for my e-learning modules, just so that it's clear, it's concise, um, and for navigation access, making sure I have a navigation slide. So I'll dive in a little bit into these with scenarios that I've experienced in the workforce. So navigation slides, I couldn't figure out why my learners were not passing my test. I had went over questions for the quizzes, went over the content with a sample population. They were like, cool, like they went through it flying colors. And when I did it auditory, like just with them in the room, asking them questions, and I could not figure out why it was showing like 5 out of the 10 were failing when in the sample room, all of them passed. Come to find out, my population did not know how to use e-learning. So I had to create a navigation slide. It was something as simple as creating a slide before the module starts, explaining to them, this is how you move around, this is how you move around the slides. And so once I did that, everyone passed. And the people that didn't pass, it wasn't for the lack of not knowing how to use the keyboard and use the or even on their tablets use the navigation. They all understood, this is how I go through the module. And then with audio, at my previous company, all the content I created had to be translated in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And I by no means speak all those languages. So what I did was, I had a reviewer who would go in and make sure that if it was in Spanish and if it was in Vietnamese, it sounded good. And then we were able to have someone either record those voiceovers or use the text to speech for translation and to record those voiceovers for us for the modules too. So that was something that was a challenge that we had to make sure everybody had access to, right? Because the population I was creating content for, not necessarily, they necessarily could not read in their native language. All of them maybe couldn't. So we relied heavy on audio, and being told like what to do in their native language using audio. And then for visual, I made sure, and because I knew my population wasn't the strongest on reading, let me make sure that I make it picture heavy, right? I made it picture heavy, interaction heavy, So I did a lot more simulation to where I showed them this is what you're doing. And I kind of showed that example of it, someone doing it to kind of connect those, get those their wheels going. And then once again, I just kept it really simple because if I keep in mind that my learners may not be able to read well, I don't want to make sure I want to make sure I'm not keeping my design really really busy with text or just in general with like flowery images and flowery things. Keeping it very very simple to okay, let's just keep it so what they need to actually see that's going to go with the audio. So that's why it was really important to have that simple universal design when it came into play. And then cultural intelligence for instructional design. I kind of talked a little bit about this already. Language considerations. So I found out in this time, and some people might know, but I didn't know that when it comes to the Vietnamese language specifically, it had a change in a certain amount of a decade, right? So my population was used to working with more traditional Vietnamese language, and that's different with how things are said and how it's written. I had to learn that from sitting with some of the employees, some of the workers, just getting to know them and learning the culture and learning their language and learning the arts of their language. So it takes a lot of investigating, getting to know, digging in deep to your learners, especially if you're working with a certain company. Just getting to know those people. Don't be afraid to get to know the culture. Just let them educate you. Maybe not so much you saying, "Oh, I know this," but kind of just asking everything inquisitive. Because it was halfway through making content for them that I realized, oh, Vietnamese, these are it's two different ways. There's a newer age Vietnamese writing, then there's a more traditional um, um, way of doing it. And so I wanted to make sure because my population was a little bit of more of the older crowd, I needed to go back and make sure like these words and how you pronounce certain words um, is more leaning towards traditional because they need to learn it, right? The newer Vietnamese, everyone that was younger knew traditional because sometimes how to attend their parents or their grandparents may say things a certain way, or it might sound how it sounds to us like old English. Like, oh, they're speaking more like older Shakespeare English, right? We still understand it, but the newer one is the one we use often, right? So I knew that with my older population that I was making more content for the larger group of Vietnamese people that I was making content for, I needed to make sure I included that in there. And I needed to make sure that the translations were well thought out and actually really, really good. So we had two people that filtered the translations just to make sure these translations are good, it works, and everyone really people will understand it. We spotted it out with some of the learners to say, hey, whenever I was doing kind of like the focus group, like, hey, do you understand this? Does this make sense to you? And I would do a lot of asking what certain parts were on the floor. So that content that I created was very much tailored to that company because they might call a bolt a certain thing on the floor, and all the people that were working on the floor knew what that meant. So they would say call it a certain name. So it was important for me to get the learners buy-in because I might call it a bolt. Someone might translate it straightly to a bolt, and that might not be the right term that they're using on the production floor. So I needed to make sure that that was all that was translated correctly for them. And then visual representation. That holds a heavy um, mark for me because I like to capture the men and women and the people that are on the production floor when I'm doing content, right? If my large population I'm making content for is Hispanic, I want to make sure to capture those real um, people in my modules in my training. A lot of times you'll be surprised. The production workers that I've worked with and the retail workers, they loved getting their photo taken. They were always ready to pose. Like, what do you need? What do you need photos of? So once they got to know me as an instructional designer, there, they always helped visual aids, right? Also, um, As a little side note is once you get really good with people and your learners, they'll start taking photos for you, and they'll start helping you in the sense of that's what happened to me. Like they started helping me, like, hey, I know you're coming out to the production floor. Take a photo of this. You need a photo of this. Okay, I'll pose. I'll be your model for it. And so that visual representation, because they saw it in content and they kind of knew what I was coming out there for, they were willing to have buy in, and they were like, oh, I can't wait for the material to come out so I can see where I'm at and see what you wrote about, and see how you kind of brought it to us. So I had a lot of buy-in with the learners because they knew that I was creating something for them, tailored specifically for them and their group of people. And then communication style, balance it with indirect approach, respect cultural differences and feedback. So I kind of spoke to this throughout, is making sure to include everyone when it comes to it, right? Get feedback on what they like, what they didn't like. And people do it, the survey at the end of the module. We were not allowed to have surveys for my company at the end of e-learning. So what it meant was I had to go out there with a checkboard. I understand some of it was biased because they're telling me exactly how they liked my content or didn't. But if you've ever worked with older Vietnamese and Spanish people, they are very honest and they will tell you truly how they feel about something if they don't like it. And so we weren't allowed to have surveys really in my company, but I would go through, me and my coworker would go through and just kind of get from them, what did you like, what you didn't like. If you didn't like this music in the beginning, okay, I can change that. That's no point. Okay. But how did you feel about the content? Were you able to get it? Did you find help in it? So kind of just getting that in there. And then global versus local. So create more content that works globally. Um, I think that with that, how I interpret that is making sure that my content is with the times, right? So it might be hard to get a certain population um, in there and keep changing things, keep it updated. But once a year, I believe in going through content, making sure it's up to date, making sure we have the most accurate depiction of what's going on in there, in our material. If our population has changed to where it's mainly no longer mainly Vietnamese for that department, let's get some new photos in there while we update the content to make sure the processes and procedures are still good. So that's kind of how I view it. And then inclusive across all generations. I kind of talked a little bit about this. This is more just kind of like what we're seeing right now, that's in there. And I said five because we do have a little bit of Gen X, or sorry, alphas. Is it alphas the next one? The one under Gen Z. We do see a little bit of them depending on what workforce you're in, because you can start working in the US at the age of 15 in some companies. So we are seeing a little bit of that mixing in there too. But it's just important to know kind of what each generation prefers. And I don't say that because I don't think you should pick just one that you're making content for or the major one. But I think it's a healthy challenge to mix between all of them, right? I know some people love their paper and they love printed options. But we also need to include printed options while we also have some technology because the workforce is changing towards that. So I find it as an instructional designer, as a consultant, to challenge a little bit to say, yes, we can give you some paper, but let's make sure that we're making everything go all the way through to just incorporating all kind of aspects. Do some mentoring, do some self isolation work, some group work when we're doing rolling out new equipment or new um, technology. So just taking that time to kind of move through and keep it inclusive. Don't just pick one, but it is important to know what your main population of learners are. Right, and as if you have to go out there and look and kind of see, like, okay, I don't really know what age this person is, but I can ask them, what do you prefer, print, digital, or how? Just ask these questions, but get to know your learners, but then also do a little bit of a challenging them, and then also comfort them, let them know. I know it might be hard for you to click through this e-learning module and you might just want a pamphlet. You might just want a booklet, but let's take the time to get to know this. I added navigations to kind of help. I added auditory too to kind of make it a little bit easier. So if you're having a hard time reading and you're not really um, understanding the words on the screen, you can still gain it through audio. So I think it's just important to mix these things up and get to know, what they're working with. I love gamification. I've been using that straight out the box. I don't mind telling you I fall in the millennial realm, but I love gamification. And a lot of your Gen X and your Boomers actually do too. But I think a lot of it comes into play with explaining how things work, right? Once they know how things work, everyone usually just jumps on board with it. And if they can't get it, they'll come to you and they'll figure out. So it's a lot of what I did also was just learning how to explain things and be very, very patient with my learners that may be having a harder time adapting to different formats. And so I like to leave people with little nuggets. So, what are things that you all can do today for your company when you're thinking of this in mind? You might have already started thinking about this, like, do we do this? But just take a time and audit your existing content, right? Go through, I do it once a year with every company I'm with. I try to make sure I can go through and just edit content and just kind of look and see where these things are. The more you do it, the easier it will be to spot. Um, and then making sure that there's engagement, there's representation, update some of the language, right? Making sure it's inclusive while also making sure the language is still relevant to what's happening today. And then gather some feedback, right? It might not be your whole team, but if you can gain in one coworker and that you may talk to, you say, hey, this, I want you to look at this, and I want you to take the opportunity to look at this material with these things in mind. Think about this, think about that, kind of just sharing those points of what they can think about and how they can what you kind of saw in today's presentation, and give them that scope of what they should be looking for, and then asking for that feedback. It always works. When I have done it with some coworkers, they're like, actually, I never thought about that. Let me go look at my files that I've done. And they usually go back and go look at theirs and see if they've incorporated any of these steps in their material. Oh, that's a little wonky, but here's some key takeaways. Inclusion is strategic. Start with structure. Continuous process is never stops because of how our world is. We continue to have things that change. And then everyone benefits. It helps. It doesn't hurt anyone. I love to say that you take an opportunity to make your material inclusive. Never hurts anyone. It helps people feel more connected to your company, feel more, just in general, feel more included and seen. And so it's never hurts. It always helps. And so it just takes us a little bit more time for us to do those steps and be intentional with that process. And so with that, I always say, let's connect. I have giveaway resources. If you email me at this email or my LinkedIn or go to my website and sign up on there, I can send you kits, books for you guys to use. I am releasing an ebook too, so you guys will be able to have um, first dibs on that for attending the training. So just take a time, connect with me. I love to talk back and forth on LinkedIn, give some ideas out. I've worked for various companies and consulted with some companies from Europe to the US. So just take an opportunity to connect. I also, when you reach out for any of these resources, I would like for you to tell me an answer to the reflection question. So, what is one inclusive design practice that you will implement in your next learning project, or something you have in mind of implementing? And then I'll just email you the link to the resources, to the book, to the kits, whatever you want. But yeah, thank you for allowing me to present today. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Ashley. That was great. I've got a few questions myself for you. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah. And anybody, if you have anything at all you want to add to chat, any questions that you have, please go ahead and post, and then I can add those to the questions I'm going to be asking Ashley right now. So why did you get into inclusion and accessibility? What was it that that drove you into that field?
So I actually kind of fell into it, like everything in my career. I started working mainly with a company where they were in the process of doing some really, really big things all at one time. And a lot of things that they were trying wasn't sticking. So, me being the investigator, I love watching murder mysteries and crime shows. Me being the investigator that I was, I put on my hat and I was like, we need to figure out, because I've talked to these people on the production floor. I know that they're smart. Let me figure out what is kind of happening here. And in that opportunity, I saw where a lot of people weren't, they were talking about diversity and inclusion, but it wasn't really in the aspect of what I was needing when I was researching. And so I just started going back to, I mentioned before, I am dyslexic. I went back to my background of what my mom used to teach with me to get me to understand information. She's like, okay, let's go with how can, if I say it to you, can you understand it? Okay. And so I went back to my background, which is such a full circle moment. But that's how I kind of got here into learning it. And it really, really helped the employees at that company, because they were like, "Oh, we finally get it. Like, you finally get us. You finally understand what we're saying." Because they were like, it was a connection barrier between the previous training team and them, and getting the information across so where they could learn and it'd be easy. And so I say I always fell into it because I did not know when I was getting hired on for that position that that was something that I was going to be doing on the side, because I was so gun hold of like, I need to figure out how these people learn. I need to figure out what is stopping them. It could be something so simple, and I just kept getting stuck on that. And it really was simple when you really look at it from this lens, but it was a lot of digging through papers and figuring out studies on how to get adult learners to this spot.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And it sounds like you worked with such a diverse population, not just, in cultures, but in also in ages,
Yes.
um, genders. How did that come about? Like, how did you get experience doing that? I mean, you mentioned that you'd work with Spanish speaking folks and Vietnamese. Like,
Yes. So our company was an equal opportunities company. They didn't believe in turning people away. They just believed that they should be put in a specific department that fits for them, right? And so they would do the test. It was a manufacturing company, so they did a
uh,
test upon hire, and wherever you scored, which something later I like eventually talked to some people about, like that test is really not really fitting to those people, honestly. But wherever they scored is pretty much where their position of their job was, right? And so if you scored lower, you did pouching packing, which meant you just count pack the pouches and stuck them in the box, right? But even those people deserve to be able to have the opportunity, which is what my material did, to promote up, because they just need to figure out how they learned. It wasn't that they weren't smart. It was just that maybe I'm not a person that learns from reading text. I just learned because it's audio and I have a visual representation of what to do. And so them hiring such a variety of group of people, I was able to see um, the older generation like advance up, which was really cool. One of the guys I worked with became a nighttime supervisor, and he was like, I was a patch and packer before this, but he's translating to me with another guy, so, but it's just explaining that you don't even understand my language, but you were able to make content for me to where I was able to now make way more money than I was as a patch and packer. So I think that really does that company, at first I was like, oh my god, how am I going to work with these groups? I don't know any of this stuff. But I started looking at people as people and human, and like, let me learn your culture, right? I learned like, okay, what's the proper way, like outside of content, let me go learn how to properly eat pho, right? Like, let me know what food do you guys make, right? What are some phrases, some words I can learn to use, on the production floor, just to make, just looking at people as people. And it didn't cost me none to go and learn that culture and get to know, okay, well, this guy's older, he speaks this type of Vietnamese versus someone that's maybe younger. It makes sense when you think about it, right? In English, an older population may speak a different way than like the new younger. I don't understand anything that my younger sister says, right? But I'm like in between her and my mom. So, but like, just learning those things and making it applicable and not being scared to just learn that stuff.
Right. Yeah. No, and I know because I used to work in manufacturing too,
Mm,
and it's really satisfying because not only are you, if you're building that pathway for people to succeed, it's not just helping them, but it's helping the business.
hmm
And that's really really satisfying. Christina has this comment here: imagine employees actually being excited for your learning
I
modules to come
I
out.
tell you, I tell people this all the time. I'm like, like people, how do you get them to take it? I was like, as simple as taking photos on the production floor of the people that are there.
Mm,
Like that's it's such a simple concept, but just taking the pictures because I would always tease them, and I love to get to know people, and I would say, "Oh, my uncle," right? Like, no way are they actually my uncle, but my uncle is there, and so I'll say, "Uncle, did you tell them that I took a picture of you on the floor?" And they'll, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." And he'll translate and tell, "Oh, she took pictures of me." And they'll, "Oh, no, no, take pictures of me, take pictures of me." And so I would ask them, "Okay, how? Okay, this is what the SOP says," and I would hold it up. How do you actually do it? And so because if you know L&D, they do not do it the way that it's written down ever. And so I would say, okay, uncle, explain to me. Tell me. And I always use slang, my slang, right, to make it feel more relatable. Like, tell me the T. Tell me the T. What's the T? That means information, the 411. Oh, okay, okay. Tell me the T on how to do this actually, right? And so I had their buy-in and they knew that I was making content for them. So
yeah,
they were more excited to take it because they knew that like, hey, I see you as a person and I know that you're not following the SOP way, but how can I measure SOP versus what they actually do to keep production going and making that content. And so that's what they were really excited. That in their photos, they knew that I was making material for them and they were captured in it.
that's great, Ashley. One last question for you. I'm just curious about your experience having dyslexia and any specific challenges that you faced just as an L&D professional.
Yeah, I would have never in a million years thought this was my career.
Yeah.
So in college, I was actually double biology major, and everyone was like, "You're so good at communicating and speaking. Go do this." And I was like, "Okay," but kind of the things in here, my background, I think, is very, I think that things are very purpose in life. And with my background, this kind of helped me. My background kind of helped me with making this material because I knew my mom would always tell me, "You're not dumb. You just don't know how to learn. Like you don't. You need to know how you learn. You're never dumb. Just you need to know how you learn." And I took that mindset when I made content for everyone. It's like they're not dumb. They just need to know how they learn, right? And then is it accessible, right? A lot of that is not being accessible to them. And so for me, I take a lot of those practices in there. I am a firm believer of proofreading because I do have that form of dyslexia where things are there's like 7 different types and I do have about 5 of them, and so I like to make sure I have people proofread things. And so if you notice throughout the presentation, I always have feedback. Someone give me feedback, someone tell me what it
Mm,
looks like, someone explain. And I had to become where I'm not sensitive to where this is my training and you're critiquing my training, but just this is for the greater good. I need people to understand what I'm writing.
yeah.
And so I rely heavily on feedback, whether it's with like, I don't mind going straight to my manager. I've been blessed with good managers. And so, hey, can you read this for me? Can you make sure this looks good? I might not tell them exactly the reason why, because I have dyslexia, but I always just offer feedback. Like I'm very open when it comes to that, right? I have my SMEs look and read through it, and then I have the guys on the floor read through it. So by the time it gets to my manager, it should be golden.
Yeah.
And maybe some minor edits, but like not written wise, not wording wise.
Have you ever gotten into, or have you ever had to support a dyslexic learner?
Um, yes, but they weren't technically diagnosed, but I know the signs so I can see it myself. Yeah. And that's why I always say, especially the guy that became a nighttime supervisor, a lot of it was I stopped making fill in the blanks because they were getting it wrong. But he wasn't getting it wrong because he didn't know it. He was getting it wrong because when he put it into the computer, it wasn't spelling correctly. Right. So, um, I think that that was something that when I worked with him, that's a telltale sign of dyslexia. But I didn't know where his journey was at with accepting learning challenges because a lot of people it's a very taboo topic. But I was able to see that and like let me just curve it because someone else could just have a bad day and misspell, but this person I know for sure he knows it, but then also he was speaking Vietnamese, so his written also wasn't that good even when we transferred over to Vietnamese writing.
Mm,
So it was definitely times where most of the people that I've seen have some form of learning challenges. I don't like to say disabilities, but challenges where they just need to figure out what to do to combat that. So that's kind of what when I worked with him, I'm pretty sure because it was some other things with hearing the audio, but maybe missing some of the wording, and also when reading, missing some of the wording whenever he was relaying it back to me. And so that's signs of it too.
wow,
But I
very
know that, so I
interesting.
can see it. Like I know.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, let's see here. Let's see, Lorianne added, honestly, such good advice. It's not a critique about you, but it's for the greater good.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
awesome.
Don't be
Excellent.
sensitive when it comes to feedback. Just take it as you're making it for the company. Don't be sensitive. I always say that.
Ashley, thank you so much for opening up the
For
event.
having
I do appreciate you being here. Thank you. And thanks everybody for attending. We do have another session coming up at 12 o'clock Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. I almost missed a couple QA questions here. Oh, here's one from Lorianne. What's a reliable AI voiceover tool you like to use?
So I actually love using it in, I don't know if you use Storyline to create content, but Storyline has some that are built in that 9 times out of 10, most of them sound well. They sound good and they sound like someone actually recorded it for you. So I pretty much used inside of Storyline. There was another tool that I used before Storyline had that feature adapted to it. Um, I cannot recall exactly what it was, but I know for the most part I use Storyline um, because I learned that some people are more susceptible to hearing women's voices. Some populations more hearing women's voices versus a masculine voice, and so that is something that I learned too whenever making content.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that. That's great.
I know it's
Um,
like it.
let's see. Here's another one. How do you balance accessibility and cost, particularly in global organizations?
So I think that I'll use an example. There's some free software that you can use to do video editing. I use it right now as I'm starting to create a YouTube channel. It's free, but it has captions. You can do closed captions in there, and so a lot of I think it takes time of digging for it. My company, I also did kind of market like, hey, this is an investment. We didn't have Storyline at first when I got hired on there. We were just using Beyond the free version. And so I said, hey, like, this is something that I think we need to invest in. Like, we're kind of behind in the market. And if we use this, maybe we only have 2 licenses versus the whole team. Something we did too at one point. We had 2 laptops and we only had 2 licenses. It took longer to get content out there, but we were able to. And within a year of them seeing it, they had more buy in to say, okay, let's get at least 2 more. So everyone had it on their computer. But I think it's a healthy mix of going out there and searching, like finding some of those resources um, when it comes to getting like material that makes it easily accessible, but then also explaining to your company that, hey, this is buy-in. Like you're gonna have, if you invest in our people, at least doing 1 or 2 licenses for programs, and if you do programs like Adobe 360 or Articulate 360, sorry, you get so many different platforms within that one subscription. So you're able to really utilize your bang for your buck if you really optimize it well. But I think that's a good question when it comes to companies because I did have to vouch a lot for why we needed to purchase it and kind of show them like this is really good for our population. They're able to learn, they're able to create content. And I kind of negotiated with doing just 2 licenses at one time and saying, please, like, let's just do 2 so you can see what I'm saying. You can see why I think this is good for us. And then we were able to eventually get 2 more because they
Yeah.
saw that it was useful.
I mean, ultimately, do you have to come up with any data or anything to prove that ROI? I know that, I mean, we've actually talked about this in TLDC in the past, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. And I did a lot of research because my HR director for that company was very he wanted numbers. He didn't really want like feelings is what he would say. And so in order to purchase it, I did have to bring up some numbers. So I had to go back in and kind of
Right.
show. And then I also brought in think I have it for myself on my computer. So I also brought in modules for him to see and kind of explain to him so he can take them, right? And so he can see what it looks like. With that, he was like, okay, let's give it a year. I'll budge for a year, and we'll see what we feel about the next time budget come around.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's great that they're open to it. All right. Last question. How do you collect data to determine which languages need content translated?
I translate all of them.
Yeah.
I didn't really do it based on which content. I translated all of the content. If someone's eyes are probably popping out, like, excuse me, yeah, I translated all of them because I wanted to be able to, for someone to pick it up, no matter who they were, and be able to um, take that. I also advise you to email me because I talk about that I have a guide where I talk about where how that looks like with e-learning modules. I had three options: English, Vietnamese, Spanish, and they clicked it and they went on their journey on taking that content. So I always, which is another buy-in if you have someone, if you have multiple languages for your company, or that option is needed within the company. But yeah, I just translated everything. All job aids, all flyers, everything was translated for 3.
Does someone in-house translate it or do you go outside?
So we did both. We started with in-house, and then when I decided to like just go all in, we did a small investment only for large documents. So only for like our manuals and things like that. We had outsourced because that's really, really pricey. Really, what I advise doing, and some people don't like this, is I just say pay the people or hire the people that speak dual languages, right? And in that aspect, it's you kind of get a free for. I told my boss, I'm like, "Oh, the next person, make sure they speak Spanish because we have a Vietnamese designer. We have me, I speak English, but a Spanish one would be perfect because at a certain point, I would just feed content to them, and then they would feed me
Yeah.
their content. And so that's kind of how we ate costs was just hiring people that spoke multiple languages. Um, Also, different. Don't be afraid to go outside of your departments. Some people, if you need something very small translated, people are usually willing to help you in other
Yeah.
departments if they speak it. And so that's what I also did for like quick turnaround documents.
Sounds great. Jeanette's adding it definitely reduces learner fatigue.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Tabitha had also mentioned, I think this is in reference.
11 Labs. Yes, that was
Yeah.
that was the one that I used for voiceover. It was 11
There
Labs.
you go. Well said, 11 Labs. And sometimes Tabitha uses Mic Monster. Those are good ones to check out. All right. Well, okay, that's it. Ashley, thanks
Thank
again.
you.
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for being here. Again, 12 o'clock in about an hour, we're going to have our next session. Oh, and I do want to add for the last session of today, Robin DeFelice has a little bit of pre-work. I'm going to just paste the link there, a Qualtrics link to her session. If you can check that out, she's going to be talking about solving problems, not people, L&D team success. Let me just drop that in. If anyone is interested in taking that survey before attending that session, please jump in there and give that a go. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and just close the session out. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, Ashley. Hope to see you at TLDC again.
Thank you.